Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. It is Wednesday, September 11th, 2024. I am Jer Stays. Joining me is Norris Howard. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, man. As usual, it's a wonderful afternoon here in Detroit. The sun is shining, birds chirping, dogs barking. It's fantastic.
Well, you know, I feel like we have a concept of a plan for this podcast, my friend.
Yes, we do, but unfortunately, we are not president yet, and therefore the details of said plan cannot be shared.
So, look, we're going to cover a bunch of local stuff and get into your feedback. But, you know, Norris, real quick, your first takes from this debate, especially from like a local angle, something you can think about after watching last night.
You know, I tried to do that. I tried to localize this as much as I could. And the only thing I keep coming back is, you know, it's been a long time since I've seen such ass whooping. It's been a real long time. I mean, I think... Listen, I know a lot of...
Was it one that would be on like that Metro Detroit News Instagram?
Yes, it was a world star level kicking. And the thing that I really sort of go back to is if you looked at that debate with any sort of level of objectivity and looked at it like a normal human being, one that is removed as much tribalism from themselves as possible, it was night and day. There was one person on that stage that looked ready to be president, and there was another person on that stage that looked like they were ready for the nursing home. And that's what happened.
The hard part about this is that I actually appreciate a true debate of ideas, and I don't feel like that's what this was. Number one, obviously, both sides had an issue of not answering the question, but one side looked like, oh, you could be president. The other side, it was like, oh, this... You know, we there's a bunch of issues that we can't talk about because we're dealing with these like extreme basics right here.
It is extreme basics. I mean, I think there were moments in which Kamala Harris tried to get to some semblance of sharing her plan, but I think so much of the oxygen in the room was taken up just by Donald Trump's, nonsense, for lack of a better term. And I'm not trying to say this to be partisan either way. I'm truly trying to look at this as an objective viewer of our political process at play, and he offered nothing. Every time the question was asked, what is your plan? What are you trying? He offered literally nothing. He offered grievance, he offered fear, and he offered lies. And for me, just looking at that debate, I don't see how you can look at Trump as a viable candidate. I truly don't. I just don't see it. I don't see it.
Are you saying from just like a pure competence point of view?
Yes. From a pure...
Not even looking at the issues.
Not looking at the issues. I would love if we could have a conversation about the issues about this debate. But we didn't get that. What his issue beyond immigration doesn't exist. His plans for the issues beyond them don't exist.
Even when it comes to immigration, and this does affect Metro Detroit because we actually do have a large number of immigrants in our city and in our region.
As well as an international border.
People don't talk about it, but there's a lot of things, whether it's drug traffic, human trafficking. Those are things that are actually happening right now. So it is something that concerns us. But, you know, the idea of like, oh, well, are we just going to like deport 11 million people? It's logistically impossible. And then the idea of submarining a bill to make progress because of election timing. I mean, that's that happens in politics, but it also was pretty clear of like, oh, if we solve the issue, then we're not going to have that thing to run on.
You know, if I'm a liberal in America and I hear Donald Trump talking about we are a nation in decline, everything's terrible, we're going to hell in a handbasket, and then I would pose the question to him, then why are so many people literally dying to get here? Explain that. Because if this is such a terrible place, why do people want to come here so bad? You can't make those two energies jive. And that's sort of the issue that I saw also with the debate last night, is that what I saw was one candidate in Kamala Harris who is at least trying. I'm not saying she was effective. I thought she was effective in some points, and I thought she was less so in other points. At least trying to speak to the American people, at least trying to talk about what the future could look like in her administration. And then another candidate who only had the ability to talk about how bad of a job that the last guy did. And, you know, when they had the exit polls and they had the focus groups on the various networks, it became very clear that the American people did not like his performance last night.
You know, we can unpack this debate forever, but I honestly believe, and it doesn't always happen this way, but I do believe that Taylor Swift coming out with that endorsement right after the thing reaches a bunch of people in the demographic that honestly matters in this conversation. Because you know what? Most people have made up their mind about all this stuff, but there's a very small sliver that haven't. And someone like Taylor Swift lending her platform with all of the likes that are behind it and everything else, it's silly. I know that some outlets covered it more than others in like the post-debate fracas that was there. But I think stuff like that in an election where it's going to be about a few thousand people in just a few states, that's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, you know what? 1,000 people get motivated in Michigan because they went with Taylor Swift. That could actually change things.
It could. And I mean, when we're talking about the margins as thin as they are in a state like ours here in Michigan, you know, perfect example is I think Kamala Harris's answer on Gaza was quite frankly terrible. I thought it was a terrible answer to try to assuage the deep divisions that are happening in the Democratic Party on the Gaza issue. However, Trump offered an even worse answer, and that's the sort of dichotomy that we're dealing with right now. And that's the type of stuff that makes people either stay home or feel not confident. And I think to your point about the Taylor Swift thing is that, as silly as it sounds, that's the kind of stuff that offsets the people who may decide to stay home, or offsets the people who feel like their voice is not going to be heard in this election. And I just think there could not have been a more total victory for Kamala Harris last night than what she had. I mean, it was an absolute trouncing.
Well, in politics, and this is something I've learned as I've gotten older, you will never find a candidate that aligns with all your values.
Never.
What you need to do is find the candidate that is closer to where you think you can continue to apply pressure to convince them to go with your way. And because that's just the way the system is. We do not have a multi-party system. So what you have to do is pick a candidate where they're within the window of persuadability on a number of issues, because they're never going to line up with you at all. And I think that something like the Swift endorsement, I think, you know, the more that this becomes an election that isn't just about the very online people, because that came out in the conversation last night. So online, like, and I'm on Threads, you're on, you know, Threads and whatever. Most of the world is not tuned into that. Most people do not care. They are living their lives.
But Taylor Swift is somebody who can press her finger down on the scale and make millions of people move. And that's what happened last night. And I hope that gets more people out to vote, because ultimately I just want people to vote. I just want people to go out and vote. But we will see. There is potential that there's one more debate coming up before Election Day.
We'll see.
We'll see, especially after that performance. I think that Trump's camp may not be that keen on having another debate. But we will see how much of effect this had. I mean, we thought the last debate was the most consequential in like American history. And I'm not going to say this is exactly the same as that, but in terms of how poor the performance was, I think that was just as bad as Joe Biden's in the debate this summer.
All right, let's get local and talk about a proposed big project, a transformation of the former Kmart headquarters site in Troy as a mixed-use development. This was in Crane's Detroit business. This project would be called Somerset West. This property has been quiet for a very long time. This old Kmart headquarters right there, Big Beaver. And I want to say Coolidge. Is that the road? I always forget the road.
Yeah.
I know
Schaefer.
where Somerset is.
Big B Schaefer, as us in Detroit know it.
Right. And then, of course, there's Big Beaver. You go right off of exit 69 at I-75 over there.
Of course.
And this is a big project. And I want to talk about it for a minute because the scale of this development, there could be up to 750 residential units, 500,000 square feet of office space, 300,000 square feet of retail, and maybe a 250-room hotel. There will be a University of Michigan health facility. That'll be about $250 million going in there. And construction, assuming all approvals go through, would start next summer. I will link to this in the show notes. Man, I mean, let's talk about this. 750 units, even if it gets scaled down a little bit, that's huge.
Yeah, it's gigantic. And I think, ultimately, this is showing me where Oakland County is sort of thinking about their future. Because Oakland County, as we saw in Royal Oak and other pockets in Ferndale as well, there's a schism between the people who are there and new people who want to be there. And the problem with so much of Oakland County is at capacity. Southern Oakland County is at capacity.
Well, it's landlocked, and a lot of it's single-family housing.
Yeah, it's landlocked. There's not a lot of room. There's almost no vacant land for people to be able to create new developments on. And this pocket, this sort of strip of Big Beaver Road, is an area where there is some opportunity. There already have been some office buildings, I believe a little bit closer to 75, and I believe it's Crooks, that have been converted into apartments over there by the Shake Shack. Some of those offices have already been converted into apartments across the street from the old Kelly Services.
And we don't talk about that much in the media because so much of the conversation focuses on the city of Detroit because so many of honestly, us in media and the journalists are here, right? We are on Media Row, but if we look at actual monetary impact, there's a ton of stuff happening. I mean, Oakland County is wealthy.
It's super wealthy, and that's why I think this is a really interesting move because people still want to be in Oakland County. It is still very much so a desirable place to live. The school districts are great. It's safe in terms of crime statistics for the most part. And 750 units plus additional retail and living right next to Somerset is going to be very appealing for a lot of people. And, I just feel like this is Oakland County saying, all right, we have fought tooth and nail not to have this kind of lifestyle in Oakland County. We want you to live in a house. We want you to be in a cul-de-sac somewhere. You know what? We got to eat crow on apartments. We have to develop more. I don't want to say transitional housing. That's not what I mean. But apartment living, we have to have it.
Look at that in contrast to Livonia.
The exact opposite.
The exact opposite, where they're going to let that land sit instead of build apartments. And so Oakland County is going to cash in where Wayne County is leaving it on the table. And I think about the scaled back Monroe Blocks plan too, where now that Monroe Blocks plan is a lot smaller than what's going to be happening here. And I really feel like Detroit, Metro Detroit is now truly, much like LA, a polycentric region.
Mm-hmm. No, it totally is. Like, whether it's like you have LA proper, but then you got Inglewood, you got Compton, you got Long Beach, you got, Burbank and all these other actual separate towns, Santa Monica. Yeah, that's Detroit.
But when we think about transit, when we think about investments, that polycentrism is now part of our DNA.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up Livonia, because for me, I look at Livonia as such a sort of unwelcoming place in terms of new development. And then I look at not just this development in Oakland County, but also we forget the entire Northland site over there on 8 Mile and Greenfield is being completely redeveloped into same type of situation, mixed use development.
You're seeing stuff in Oak Park.
You're seeing so much stuff being redeveloped in Oakland County, and particularly in southern Oakland County, mid Oakland County and over there in Oak Park, to allow more people to have apartment living, to rent, and to kind of get more access to Oakland County and all of its resources. And, I think Detroit got to wake up fast.
This is actually a place where I think Detroit should have led, but it's not. No. And we need to change core things about how the city does things. It's not just about incentives. It's literally about changing the system to make this happen, because this could have, and I would argue should have, happened here.
Well, and the thing is,
I'm not trying to hate that it exists.
No. Because, and that's what I was about to say. Like
this is a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it's not to be adversarial because I think there is a desire and a need for this in Oakland County. But these types of development should be in pockets all across the city. And maybe not to the scale of 750 units, but definitely some 350 and 250 and 450 size residential unit development should be popping up all across the city. There is the space for it. That's the crazy part.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. dailydetroit@gmail.com. We got another story I want to talk about. Detroit may be losing its police chief to the mental health agency. That's a partnership between the city of Detroit and Wayne County. Now, DWIN, Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network, it's $1 billion agency serving 75,000 Wayne County residents. Bridge Detroit reports that Detroit Police Chief James White applied for the open CEO job. He's, made some big changes at DPD because of his mental health background. We saw that up at the Mackinac Policy Conference. He talked about, his background in therapy. I think he's all but licensure. Don't quote me on this, but he's pretty close to being all but a therapist.
Yeah.
Honestly, this sounds like a pretty good position for somebody like him, but also opens a huge thing with the police department, and to me is another indicator that the time of Mike Duggan as mayor is winding down when you got the police chief leaving for another job.
Yeah, obviously that's speculation, but I think for me, I just see this and I just go, I just wish we had more stability in the DPD at this moment. We're starting to see chiefs. I mean, how long was he chief? I feel like he was only chief for like 3 years,
I think that's right.
Let me look. It's just, I feel like I come from the era where I felt like Ike McKenna was the chief for my whole life until I became like 30, and all of a sudden we couldn't keep a police chief. Well, it was Gil Hill and then it was Ike. But my thing is that what I'm concerned about, and not necessarily concerned about, but what I find interesting is not only do I see it as an indication of potentially changing administration, but I argue, does this change what I consider one of the better police cultures in the country? You're not seeing a lot of friction between the citizenry and the police in Detroit. There's the obvious. There's the obvious. There will always be friction between the citizenry and the police, but we haven't had the same level of flashpoints as there's been in other countries. That's not to say the police
or other cities, yeah.
Or excuse me, in other cities. That's not to say that the police haven't been found liable of misconduct. That's not to say the police haven't necessarily shot people that they shouldn't have shot. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that we haven't had those flashpoints because I also think that the city of Detroit has done a better job over the course of the last decade with community policing efforts, with getting a police force that reflects the citizens of the city and all the cultural competency that comes with that. And so I am just a little concerned on, is that going to continue with a new chief? We don't know. But
assuming he gets this job, or assuming he makes this
transition. Correct.
But this tells us he's looking to be on the way out.
That's correct.
Let's get into a little bit of feedback. A couple things from listeners I wanted to share.
Okay.
And both calling you 100% right, Norris Howard.
Because I usually am.
Oh, man, this just feeds your ego. This is why you're the Prince of Brightmoor. You had
correct.
To go for some sort of royal title. All right. So Ben, a Detroiter in exile, writes in, Norris 100% right about trucks. If you have a job that requires a truck, you can have a truck. If it isn't for work, everyone who wants a truck should have to pass a parking test. If you can't park it on the first try, you don't get to buy it.
I mean, that's a bit draconian, but it's just, the truck thing is just crazy. I just don't understand the obsession with them. It's just, I talked about this at length.
It's interesting, though, to bring this up in context of some new proposed regulations that would now mean that automakers have to account for pedestrian crashes if they get through. Because right now, when you test vehicles, it's all about vehicle crashes.
Yeah.
There's not really a piece that's about pedestrians or streets. And to make automakers have to include that is going to heavily change how trucks are made and how they're designed. Because if you look at the front end of many of these trucks, and I'm somebody who likes a pickup truck, I've got an episode that I think we're going to air next week about me running around in an electrified 1978 Ford F100, and I had a great time. So it's interesting in the context of having some news that might be a way that changes your pickup trucks in the future.
Absolutely. And you can't see kids over the hood of a lot of these trucks, I mean.
So another one, I did not catch the name, but also calls you 100% right. And this is about the Detroit People's Food Co-op. If the store was called Aldi Community Grocery because it was a co-op using partial Aldi distribution, it would have twice the business. Branding is so important. And a number of other people said the exact same thing. They don't know what a co-op is. The first time they had heard about it was listening to our show. This is a very new concept to most folks. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, again, we got to start meeting people where they are.
There were at least 25 people who wrote in who said they've never heard of it and that they've never heard of a co-op before.
You got to tap in and you got to understand your community. This is what I mean. It's like, it's wonderful to go out of town and bring an idea from somewhere else to the city that you think is a good idea. The Detroit People's Food Co-op is a phenomenal idea. It is a phenomenal store. It is a phenomenal, that has phenomenal products, but it is not necessarily meeting people where they are. And you got to understand where you are. People in Detroit have no context for a food co-op. And we said that on the show last time. And I don't necessarily think this is the Detroit People's Food Co-op's fault. That responsibility should fall on the Detroit People's Food Co-op to educate the populace on what it means to be a member of a co-op or what it means to shop at a co-op. And I personally think that necessarily has not been done, but they also got to run the business. And it's hard to walk and chew gum. Yeah, it's a nonprofit and it's hard to walk and chew gum at the same time when you're a nonprofit doing that kind of stuff. So I get it. But I guess I would just want to say, instead of the sort of benevolent sort of purpose to the nonprofit, maybe a little bit of additional market research might have helped.
I'm just pulling this out of the air, but I've just thought about a place where I think foundations could help. Because there are so many nonprofits doing really great work in Metro Detroit. Nobody knows about any of them.
Yeah.
There needs to be like a marketing agency, like everybody who gets foundation dollars or everybody, whatever, we need to include marketing dollars with it.
Yes.
It's almost like there needs to be an awareness, but maybe marketing's the wrong thing, but maybe an awareness agency where it's like, this is what we do as far as support. As I cross, and I think about this because of the Love Building that I visited and how these nonprofits came together to brace each other to have their own space in Core City. And what other ways we could brace each other to do these things? Because look, Metro Detroiters and Detroiters are busy. They've got a lot to deal with. There's so much noise in the news ecosystem. We can only reach so many people, though we'd love to reach more people. Please share it with a friend. I think there needs to be more of those kind of tie bars.
We're talking about the city at large, and we're talking about how do people learn that things are here. The foundations are a great start, but that still only reaches a certain demo. And if we're talking about the city at large, it's got to be coming from your tradition. It's got to be coming from your non-traditional news sources. It's got to be coming from your social media. And to be quite frank, it's got to be on IG and TikTok, period.
That's why you're going to see more stuff coming out of us from our newsletter, revamped, IG, doing a bunch of stuff, because it's about reaching the people. You got to reach the people with it.
Reach the people.
Thank you so much for listening to Your Daily Detroit, where we are pushing Detroit forward. You can find our show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on YouTube, and on God.
On God.
On God. Wherever you want to find Daily Detroit, you can find it. Always send me an email, dailydetroit@gmail.com. Love your feedback. Keep it coming. Norris Howard, thank you for spending some time with us today. I appreciate you.
And I'm always happy to be here.
All right. With that, I'm Jer Stays. Remember that you are somebody, and we will talk tomorrow.